In this video, you will learn the basics of conducting a monarch count and habitat assessment survey as part of the Xerces Society's Western Monarch Count. This video will provide an overview of monitoring efforts, highlight several key resources like the step-by-step monitoring guide and survey protocol, and share helpful tips for conducting your surveys in the field. There are a couple things to note before we get started. If this is your first time volunteering or monitoring for the Western Monarch Count, you will need in-person training with either a regional coordinator or an experienced volunteer before surveying your own sites. In-person training should be prioritized whenever possible. Oftentimes, regional coordinators will host group training events for both new and returning volunteers alike before or during the Thanksgiving count. You can check the events page on westernmonarchcount.org or visit the project's Facebook page for more information about upcoming trainings and opportunities that you can participate in. Second, this video alone will not satisfy the training requirements for new volunteers. However, it will provide a good introduction of monitoring activities and guidance. Returning volunteers may also find this video helpful and can use it as a refresher course before monitoring their sites. Lastly, all volunteers should sign up via the volunteer registration form before November 1st to receive training and participate in the Western Monarch Count. You can find the volunteer registration form on the homepage of westernmonarchcount.org or on the volunteer information page under Help Count Monarchs. With that, let's dive into the basics. Volunteers for the Western Monarch Count monitor overwintering sites along the Pacific coast, from Mendocino County, California, down to northern Baja California, Mexico, during the overwintering season, which usually runs October through March of each year. Additionally, volunteers with the Saline Valley Monarch Count and Southwest Monarch Study participate in the Western Monarch Count and share data collected at inland sites in Inyo County, California, and across the state of Arizona. Migratory monarchs generally cluster in the same areas each year, and these locations are called overwintering sites. Overwintering sites offer very specific microclimate conditions to support monarch butterflies as they enter a state of reproductive diapause during the colder months. These Goldilocks conditions help them survive. The image on the left shows a zoomed out map of overwintering sites in the West as of October 2022. You can visit westernmonarchcount.org and use the interactive map to explore overwintering sites near you, find site-specific information like site names, site ID numbers, and past Thanksgiving count data. Although there is more to be learned about how and why monarchs select their overwintering sites, research suggests that the butterflies are seeking protection from wind, freezing temperatures, they're seeking adequate humidity, ample nectar resources, and fresh water nearby. There are two official volunteer monitoring periods for the annual Western Monarch Count. These include the Thanksgiving count and the New Year's count. The Thanksgiving count began in the winter of 1997 and is a 3-week monitoring period that runs from mid-November through early December. It's during this time that most monarch butterflies have arrived at their final overwintering locations and are settling in for the season. Peak monarch counts are often reported during this time frame. On the other hand, the New Year's count began in the winter of 2016 and is a 2-week monitoring period that runs from late December through early January. The New Year's count is shorter than the Thanksgiving count by 1 week to minimize variability when monitoring later in the overwintering season. Findings from the New Year's count help determine the intraseasonal population decrease typically witnessed over the winter. These decreases are likely due to a combination of factors, including monarchs moving between sites, mortality from winter storms or predation, and other things. Volunteers are welcome to submit monarch counts and habitat assessments outside of the two monitoring periods, and they will be included in the Xerces Society's database. But if capacity is limited, please prioritize monitoring during either the Thanksgiving count or New Year's count. During these two monitoring periods, volunteers use standardized survey protocol to count butterflies and assess overwintering habitat. It's important to keep the timing and protocol the same each year because this allows data to be compared between sites and over time. We'll go over the protocol later on in this video, but for now, just remember that it's important to follow the instructions on how to count monarchs and conduct a habitat assessment. Speaking of which, As I mentioned earlier, there are two types of surveys that volunteers and monitors will be asked to complete for the Western monarch count. These are the monarch count and the habitat assessment. We'll go over each type in this video. A monarch count survey entails volunteers counting butterflies and making estimates of the total number of monarchs at an overwintering site. This survey should be completed at least once during the Thanksgiving count and at least once during the New Year's count for each overwintering site assigned to the volunteer. Conducting 2 or more monarch counts for each site per monitoring period is preferred if capacity and resources allow. A habitat assessment survey is aimed at capturing the status of overwintering sites. Volunteers are asked to note key habitat features, resources, and any threats or disturbances that are observed. This survey needs only to be completed once per year for each site assigned to the volunteer. However, it's best practice to conduct a new habitat assessment anytime significant changes or disturbances are observed at the site. There are 2 versions of the habitat assessment, a short form and a long form. Volunteers may choose either option. There are standard protocol and data sheets that go along with each of these 2 surveys, and we'll go over that next. But before we do, the very first thing you'll want to do is download the step-by-step monitoring guide from westernmonarchcount.org. The step-by-step monitoring guide is an essential resource that provides comprehensive and up-to-date guidance on volunteer participation from start to finish. Volunteers should review it each season prior to participating in the Thanksgiving count in case any updates were made to processes or resources. Volunteers can find the step-by-step monitoring guide under Help Count Monarchs on the website. Once downloaded, save the step-by-step monitoring guide to an easily accessible location where you can reference it often. You can save it to your phone as a file or take screenshots, or you can print out a copy and keep it in a folder or binder that you'll take with you into the field. Next up are the protocol documents. Please download and save the monarch count and habitat assessment survey protocol in a similar fashion. These documents can also be found under Help Count Monarchs on westernmonarchcount.org. And they provide detailed instructions to help you conduct standardized surveys and collect quality data. It's very important that volunteers follow the protocol to the best of their ability. Too many deviations from the protocol may result in exclusion of certain data. The protocol documents outline standardized survey instructions for conducting monarch counts and habitat assessments, including the equipment you will need, the weather conditions that are appropriate for a count, and the type of data you will collect. In general, you will want to prepare and bring the following items when you monitor for the Western monarch count: binoculars, a backpack with water and snacks, your phone and a portable phone charger, a clipboard or notebook, and a pen or pencil to write with, your data sheets, protocol, step-by-step monitoring guide, and some optional but helpful items include a compass, GPS unit, a Kestrel wind or weather meter, or an outdoor thermometer, field guidebooks to help you identify vegetation at the site, a camera, and some find a spotting scope helpful too. Some of these items can be downloaded as apps on your smartphone. For example, the data sheets can be downloaded in the Survey123 app, and we have a training video for this. Compass apps usually take down coordinates as well, so you can download that from your app store. iNaturalist or Seek are apps that help you ID plants. And if you take weather data off your phone app, that's fine. Just please note down the name of the app in your data sheet. Additionally, please dress warm and wear layers. You will be surveying sites early in the morning, and it can be very chilly and wet. Temperatures may begin to rise as you complete your surveys, so we recommend bringing the following items if they're available to you: a hat, sunglasses, gloves, jacket, waterproof hiking boots to keep your feet warm and dry. All right, hang in there. We're almost at the fun part. So let's go over the data sheets, and then we'll talk about using all of these resources to actually conduct your surveys. You have 2 data sheet options to choose from for the monarch count and habitat assessment surveys. You can either download and use the Survey123 app to collect and submit your data directly from the field using your smartphone, or you can print out paper data sheets to write on in the field, then submit your findings through the Survey123 online forms, which can be found on the submit your data page under Help Count Monarchs on westernmonarchcount.org. Both the paper data sheets and the Survey 123 data sheets have similar questions, but you should expect some slight differences in the order and structure of questions due to their different formats. We have a training video, as I mentioned earlier, on westernmonarchcount.org that takes you through the process of setting up your Survey 123 app and filling out the digital forms. So because we already have that training video, we'll use the paper data sheets as the examples in this video. Both the Monarch Count habitat assessment data sheets will begin by asking you for observer, overwintering site, weather, and location information, including any special directions or access to the site. Then questions will get more detailed and either ask you about monarch presence at the site or habitat features and environmental observations. If you are not sure about an answer to a question on the data sheet, you can leave it blank or consult the protocol documents, ask your monitoring partner, or reach out to your regional coordinator or the Xerces Society for clarification. Since I've been using examples of the monarch count, let's go over how to complete this survey first. All right, so it's important to understand that although we call this a monarch count, in reality, it's more of a monarch estimate. Per the protocol guidance, monarch count surveys should be conducted by at least 2 observers in the early morning while temperatures are low enough that monarch butterflies remain clustered from the evening before. Usually this is below 13 degrees Celsius or 55 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very difficult to count monarchs while they're in flight. Please make sure that you are conducting your monitoring efforts under the right conditions by referring to your survey protocol and checking on the weather, confirming with your monitoring partner, etc., before heading out to your site. Weather measurements should be taken and recorded in the data sheet before beginning to count. Measurements should be taken from the same location in the grove each visit, and please note that wind direction is the direction that wind is coming from, or in other words, it's the direction that the wind is originating. This tends to be a little confusing, so we wanted to point that out in this video. Please do not monitor on days when heavy precipitation or strong winds are forecasted. Additionally, you'll know if it's too warm or too late in the day if you arrive at your site and observe a considerable number of monarchs flying around the grove. When this happens, you should still conduct your monarch count and habitat assessment surveys, but you should also schedule a return visit for another morning when conditions are more favorable. Unpredictable weather is one reason why it's very important to schedule survey dates, including backups with your monitoring partner before the monitoring periods begin. It is a major holiday season after all, and you may have to adapt your plans to the winter weather. And we also encourage you to coordinate preferences with your monitoring partner around wearing face masks or other protective gear like gloves, even taking a rapid COVID test before going out. We want you to be safe and have a good time, so we recommend following local guidelines and observing and respecting the more cautious approach if there are different preferences. You'll also want to review the protocol and data sheets to make sure you understand the data you will be collecting and how to identify and differentiate monarch behavior. We'll go over site access categories. So this is new this year in 2022. Open access refers to sites that have unrestricted direct access to the site or cluster trees. These might be public parks or open spaces that remain open all or most hours, public walkways, roadways, parking lots, etc. Sites with limited access have complete or partial access to the site or clustered trees with limitations or restrictions. So that could look like entrance fees, limited operating hours, maybe the site requires access coordination or special permissions with a manager or landowner. Maybe there are environmental obstacles such as poison oak that make accessing the site a little difficult, but it's still possible. And then finally, no access sites have no direct access at this time. The site may or may not be visible from a nearby location, but you cannot get to the clustered trees. All right, so we'll go over different types of monarch behavior that you will be noting on your data sheets too. So clustered monarchs include 3 or more monarchs that are adjacent to each other with closed wings. It's likely that the cluster formed the previous day. So these are a couple pictures of what clustered monarchs look like. And when you find those clusters, just a quick note, please identify the cluster trees and collect the coordinates and note that in your data sheet as well. It's very important information. All right, sunners are another category of butterfly you'll be asked to count. So when you see monarchs with open wings in full sunshine, those would be called sunners. So it's likely that these monarchs flew from their clusters to the sunning location. Flyers are any number of butterflies in flight, so try to survey when monarchs are clustered early mornings, like we mentioned before, but also, kind of keep a tally of flying monarchs as you move around the site and count clusters. You can also, just a little quick tip, you can also follow flyers back to their cluster locations if you're having trouble finding monarch clusters at a site, but they're there. Okay, and loners are 2 or fewer butterflies with closed wings not associated with a cluster. Grounders are any number of living butterflies on the ground. So please note that dead monarchs are counted separately on the data sheet and do not contribute to the grand total. If you observe living monarchs that have missing abdomens, please categorize them as dead monarchs on the data sheet, not grounders, because they will not survive. And so this is not super common, but in certain sites there are phenomenons of active predation, so you might run across that occasionally. You'll also be asked to record the number of mating monarchs. So if you observe monarchs displaying mating or courtship behavior, please note down the number that are exhibiting that. And lastly, you'll be asked to report or log tagged monarchs that you might observe. So if you see a tagged monarch, try to get a picture of it or record the tag ID number and contact information on the tag so that you can contact the appropriate program. The westernmonarchcount.org website has a PDF guide with some photos and contact information for certain tags that you might encounter. Here's a close-up of the data sheet where you will report the monarchs you observe based on their behavior or category that we just went over. As noted, dead monarchs do not count towards the grand total, and mating and tagged monarchs should already be included in another category on the left. Some volunteers find it helpful to start their monarch count surveys by walking or scouting the overwintering site. Usually, they use their binoculars to identify if and where monarchs are present in the site. Scouting can also be done the evening before or a couple days before monitoring your site if you want to and are able to get out to your overwintering site multiple times. This doesn't mean that overwintering monarchs are easy to spot, because they aren't, or that butterflies stay in the same location in the grove all season. They actually move around quite a bit. So just remember to take your time and communicate what you're seeing with your monitoring partner. It might take some time to develop your monarch spotting skills or powers, but with some practice in the field, you're sure to improve your skills. I promise. When there is only a handful of monarchs scattered throughout a site, you might be able to count each butterfly individually. However, when dozens or hundreds or even thousands of monarchs are present, this method is much too overwhelming, and standard practice is to count a small cluster of butterflies and then extrapolate that number out to how many similar sized clusters can be observed at the site. So let's practice this. This photo shows a cluster of butterflies in a Monterey cypress tree. We're going to run through a quick example of how to count the number of butterflies in a cluster. So the first step for you when you're monitoring your site is to identify a cluster to estimate with your monitoring partner. It's really important that you are both counting the same butterflies since you'll compare your counts for accuracy at the end. Keep in mind that some clusters in the shade may be harder to see, so it's important to carefully scan your grove with binoculars and communicate really openly with your partner. Next, you and your partner will individually count the number of monarchs in a cluster. You can still be standing next to each other, but just count them by yourselves. If it's a large cluster like the one shown, you'll count a small section or area of the cluster, then extrapolate that number out to arrive at a count estimate for the entire cluster. So in this example, we have marked the lower left of this cluster with red dots. Each dot corresponds to a monarch butterfly, and there are approximately 20 butterflies in this small area. Now we'll take this area with 20 butterflies and apply it to the entire cluster by partitioning it out with similar sized areas. Here we've broken down the larger cluster into similar sized areas, and the area we counted originally has 20 butterflies, that's in red, and there are 17 areas of similar size marked in yellow. So 20 times 17 equals 340. The estimate for this cluster is approximately 340 butterflies, with the caveat that the actual number would likely be a little bit higher since we are only seeing this cluster from one angle due to virtual training. Woohoo! So clusters have many layers of butterflies, and walking around to get different perspectives is really vital. If we were training in the field right now, I would instruct you to count and estimate this cluster from 2 or 3 different angles, then take the average of your estimate. You might find that there are closer to 25 or even 30 monarchs tucked into that lower left corner that we originally counted. So this is one reason why counting from photographs is helpful for checking your counts, but it can be limited and limiting in terms of how accurately you can count or estimate butterflies. When you go out to your site, you'll want to repeat the cluster estimation process we just went through several times before settling in on an estimate to share with your monitoring partner. You can take reference photos, but try to count the butterflies using your binoculars first. Once you have come up with an estimate for a cluster, compare your estimate with that of your monitoring partners. If both of your counts are within 20% margin, record the average of the two counts, yours and your partner's, on the data sheet. If counts are not within 20%, discuss why and then start the count process again. Repeat this process until you and your monitoring partner have agreed upon estimates for each cluster present at the site. Sum your estimates and note the total number of clustered monarchs on your data sheet. Remember, sunners, loners, flyers, grounders are all tracked separately, so tally these observations as you move around the site, and you can use the questions on your data sheet to guide your monitoring efforts, and just remember to fill out the other fields that you are prompted with. Your regional coordinator will also be able to offer more guidance on how to best count clusters, and they may even be able to tell you exactly where the butterflies will cluster at the site that you are assigned to. Regional coordinators have a ton of knowledge about monarchs at overwintering sites, especially in their region, and a lot of them have visited many or all of these sites that you'll be going to. Okay, now let's go over the habitat assessment survey. So as mentioned earlier, there are 2 versions of this survey, the short form and the long form. The short form is a 1-page assessment that covers the most important aspects of the site, whereas the long form is a slightly longer and more comprehensive assessment that's ideal for land managers and individuals interested in gathering more in-depth data. So again, you can choose, you do not need to do both. I would say the short form is generally the preference among most volunteers. Information included on the habitat assessment surveys include locality data, coordinates of the grove. The Survey 123 app has a mapping functionality that allows you to map the grove in the field. And the data sheets also include questions about habitat characteristics such as sunlight, wind buffers, tree species, and other vegetation, whether or not there are hazard trees or diseased trees present, nectar and water resources at a site, and if there are any observed or potential disturbances. If you aren't sure about any of the data fields, please consult the protocol document or leave the answer blank. All data sheets have a notes section at the end where you can write out your questions or other thoughts not captured in the data sheet. And all of the information you gather is crucial for developing site management plans and to address any habitat destruction that might be occurring at the site. For detailed instructions on how to fill out the data sheets, you can review the protocol documents and attend an in-person training event. Here's an image of monarchs sipping nectar and water at overwintering sites. So these are some of the things you'll be observing and noting down. It usually works best to conduct the habitat assessment after you finish one of your monarch counts, but you can do it anytime, and the weather isn't as important for this survey. It's most helpful to assess an overwintering site for habitat quality during the overwintering season, but if significant changes or disturbances are observed outside of the overwintering season, it's still a good idea to fill out a habitat assessment form no matter the time of year. After you've monitored your site and collected data in either the paper data sheets or Survey 123 app, you'll need to submit your data to the Xerces Society. While you and your monitoring partner can take separate notes in the field, you should work together to submit one data sheet for each of the surveys you conducted together. Please aim to submit your survey data within a few days of monitoring an overwintering site and as soon as possible during the Western Monarch Thanksgiving count and New Year's count. If you collected data on a paper data sheet, please remember to enter your findings into the Survey 123 online forms when you return home. This is really important. Entering your data into the Survey 123 app or online forms has a lot of benefits. The forms will catch and prevent most of the common errors so that you submit the best quality and most accurate data. And also, when you submit your data via the app or online forms, your findings are automatically sent to the Xerces Society and your regional coordinator. So that's really, really nice. And the app will also save copies of your submitted forms if you would like to maintain that information for your own records. That's only on the app, though. And lastly, digitizing your data saves the Xerces Society a significant amount of staff time and conservation funds. We end up entering thousands of fields of data into our database each year for the Western Monarch count, so your assistance submitting your data in a digital format is really, really valuable and helpful, and allows for more efficient and effective data processing, as well as a quicker turnaround time for results. So if you want to submit higher quality data and hear back about the monarch count totals sooner, please consider downloading the Survey 123 app or entering your findings into the online forms. Additional guidance for submitting your data can be found at the Submit Your Data page under Help Count Monarchs on westernmonarchcount.org. You've completed this training video, so now it's time to practice. So after connecting with your coordinator, outlining your monitoring plan, and attending a training, you'll want to practice on your own or with a monitoring partner. You can practice counting butterflies by picking a branch in a large tree and then focusing in on and counting the individual leaves as if they were monarchs. This will let you practice focusing your binoculars and also experience what it feels like to look up high in a tree for an extended period of time. A lot of this are things that you need to learn in the field, but I hope that this provided you with a little bit of an overview. And I'll just say the last thing you can do after monitoring and submitting your data is share your experience. So as a volunteer with the Western Monarch Count, you are serving as an ambassador for monarchs, and we encourage you to share your experience with your neighbors, your community, other land managers or landowners near you, to raise awareness and promote conservation of monarch butterflies and their overwintering sites. You can share your experience and connect with other volunteers on social media by visiting the Western Monarch Count Facebook page or by using the hashtag #SaveWesternMonarchs on all social media platforms. Thank you so much for volunteering with us and for watching this training video. Happy monarch counting. Bye.